What if the biggest thing keeping you stuck isn't your circumstances, your past, your relationship, your job, or even the people around you? What if it's something you haven't noticed about yourself yet? Your patterns, your reactions, the way you talk to yourself, the people you keep choosing, the things you tolerate, the excuses you make, the habits you repeat, and the decisions you continue making without ever stopping to ask yourself, why? Because you can't change something you're not aware of. And sometimes the hardest part of personal growth is realizing that not everything happening in our lives is outside of our control. Sometimes you have to look in the mirror and ask, what am I doing, believing, allowing, or repeating that's contributing to the life I'm currently living? That isn't about blaming yourself. It's about taking your power back. Because the moment you become aware of the pattern is the moment you finally have the opportunity to change it. And that's the power of self-awareness. Today, we're going to talk about how to recognize those patterns, understand why you do the things you do, and become aware of the version of yourself that's creating your current life. So you can intentionally start becoming the version of you who creates something different. Lasting change begins with rebuilding your identity, not chasing motivation. I help women gain identity clarity after life's biggest transitions. I am your host, Tashaya, and this is Empire Legacy Podcast. Hey love, welcome back. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. Before we begin, like this video, join the journey by subscribing to this channel and hit that bell so you get notified when I post my next video. This podcast was created to support women in a season reinvention, to rediscover who they are, become the person they were meant to be, so they can intentionally start creating a life they love through identity, purpose, and personal transformation. A season of reinvention happens after burnout, heartbreak, financial hardships, motherhood, or just feeling stuck and disconnected from yourself. Over the upcoming weeks, I will be creating tools and resources to make those transformations possible. In the last episode, we talked about discovering who you are beneath your roles. But knowing who you are also requires being aware of the thoughts, emotions, patterns, and choices that are shaping who you are becoming. Before we get into the different areas of self-awareness, let's talk about what self-awareness actually means. Self-awareness is the ability to notice and understand yourself. It's recognizing your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, patterns, triggers, strengths, weaknesses, and choices, and being honest about how they're affecting your life. It's being able to stop and ask yourself, why did I react like that? Why does this bother me so much? Why do I keep finding myself in the same situations? Why do I keep saying yes when I really want to say no? Instead of simply reacting to life, you become curious about why you think, feel, and behave the way you do. You can't change a pattern you don't realize you're repeating. You can't challenge a belief you don't realize you have. And you can't make different choices if you don't understand what's influencing the choices you're making now. But self-awareness isn't about criticizing yourself or searching for everything that's wrong with you. It's about understanding yourself. Instead of asking, what's wrong with me? Start asking, what is this trying to show me about myself? Sometimes the answer will be uncomfortable. You may recognize a pattern you need to break, a boundary you need to set, or even realize that you're contributing to something in your life that needs to change. But that's where your power begins. Because once you can see something, you have the opportunity to do something differently. Awareness gives you options. You may not be able to control everything that happens to you, and you definitely can't control other people, but you can become more aware of yourself, your reactions, and the choices you make next. And the more self-aware you become, the more intentional you can become about the woman you're choosing to be and the life you're choosing to create. So let's break down self-awareness down into 4 areas: your thoughts, your emotions and triggers, your patterns and behaviors, and your choices. Let's start with your thoughts. The first area of self-awareness I want you to start paying attention to is your thoughts. Most of us think all day without ever actually paying attention to what we're thinking. There's a conversation happening in your mind every single day when you look in the mirror. when you make a mistake, when someone doesn't text you back, when you see someone succeeding. When an opportunity comes your way, your mind is constantly interpreting what's happening around you. But here's where self-awareness becomes important. Just because you have a thought doesn't mean that thought is true. Sometimes a thought comes from fear, from insecurity, from something someone told you years ago, or an experience you've had in the past. And sometimes you repeated the same thought for so long that you don't even question it anymore. You just believe it. Maybe you tell yourself, I'm probably going to fail. I'm not good enough. I'm too far behind. Everyone else has their life figured out except for me. I'm just bad with money. I'm not confident enough. But I want you to start noticing something. What happens after you have those thoughts? Because a thought doesn't always stop at a thought. Your thoughts can influence how you feel. How you feel can influence what you do. What you repeatedly do can influence the life you're creating. Let's say an opportunity comes your way. Your first thought is, I'm probably not qualified enough. That thought creates self-doubt. Self-doubt creates fear of rejection. So you don't apply. And because you don't apply, you never gave yourself the opportunity to find out what could have happened. Then you tell yourself, see, nothing ever works out for me. And now you reinforce the same belief that stopped you in the first place. That's why becoming aware of your thoughts is so powerful. It gives you an opportunity to catch the thought before it automatically becomes your decision. Instead of believing everything your mind tells you, start asking yourself, why did I just think that? Is this actually true? Where does this belief come from? Is this based on what's happening right now, or is this something I've experienced before? And one of my favorite questions, if I didn't believe this thought, what might I do differently? Now, self-awareness doesn't mean you're going to think positively every second of the day. You're human. You're going to experience fear. You're going to doubt yourself sometimes. You're going to have moments when you think, I don't know if I can do this. The goal isn't to eliminate every negative thought. The goal is to recognize when a thought is beginning to make decisions for you. There's a difference between thinking, I'm scared I might fail, and deciding I'm going to fail, so I'm not even going to try. One, acknowledge the fear. The other, allow the fear to choose for you. I want you to start becoming observant of your own mind, especially when you notice yourself becoming insecure, discouraged, jealous, angry, afraid, or triggered. Pause for a second and ask, what was I just telling myself? Don't immediately judge the answer. Just notice it. Because the more you pay attention to the conversation happening inside your mind, the more you begin to recognize the belief that may be influencing your life. You don't have to believe every thought that enters your mind. Sometimes you just need enough self-awareness to notice it, question it, and decide whether you're going to let it guide what you do next. The second area of self-awareness is your emotions and triggers. Your emotions can tell you a lot about what's happening inside of you, but only if you're willing to pay attention to them. A lot of us were never really taught how to understand our emotions. We were taught to move on, calm down, stop crying, get over it, or just keep going. But instead of immediately trying to get rid of an uncomfortable emotion, self-awareness teaches you to become curious about it. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now and why? Maybe you're angry. Maybe you're jealous. Maybe you're anxious. Maybe you're disappointed. Maybe you're hurt. Maybe you're embarrassed. Maybe you're feeling rejected. Instead of judging yourself for feeling that emotion, try to understand where it's coming from. And this is where triggers become important. A trigger is something that creates a strong emotional reaction in you. It could be something someone says, something they do, a situation you're in, or even something that reminds you of a past experience. For example, maybe someone takes a long time to text you back, and you immediately start thinking, they don't care about you. Maybe someone gives you constructive criticism, and instead of simply hearing the feedback, you immediately feel like you're not good enough. Maybe someone tells you no, and you experience it as rejection. Maybe you see someone else succeeding and suddenly you feel jealous or behind in life. The situation is happening in the present, but sometimes the intensity of your reaction can be connected to a belief, insecurity, expectation, or a past experience. That's why I want you to start paying attention to the moments when your emotions feel especially strong. Instead of immediately reacting, Stop and ask yourself, what exactly triggered me? What am I actually feeling? What story am I telling myself about what just happened? Does this situation remind me of something I've experienced before? And most importantly, how do I want to respond? Because feeling emotion and acting on emotions are two different things. You can be angry without saying something you regret. You can feel rejected without deciding you're unworthy. You can feel jealous without becoming bitter towards someone else's success. You can feel hurt and still communicate in a healthy way. That's emotional self-awareness. It's not about never getting triggered or never experiencing difficult emotions. It's about learning to recognize what's happening inside of you before automatically allowing that emotion to control what you do next. And the more you practice this, the more you start noticing patterns. You might realize I get defensive whenever I feel criticized, or I shut down whenever I feel like someone isn't listening to me, or I overthink whenever I feel uncertain, or even I say yes when I want to say no because disappointing people makes me feel uncomfortable. Those realizations are powerful. Your emotions aren't your enemy. They're information. Pay attention to them. Get curious about them, because sometimes your strongest emotional reaction can teach you something important about yourself. And once you understand what you're feeling and why, you have a much better chance of choosing how you want to respond instead of simply reacting. The third area of self-awareness is your patterns and behaviors. This is where I want you to start looking at the things you repeatedly do, not just what keeps happening to you. A pattern is something that continues showing up in your life. Maybe you keep choosing the same type of unhealthy relationships. Maybe you constantly put everyone's needs before your own and then end up feeling drained or resentful. Maybe you get excited about a goal. You work towards it for a few weeks, lose motivation, quit, and eventually you move on to something else. Maybe every time something becomes difficult, you procrastinate or avoid it. Maybe you avoid uncomfortable conversations and then become frustrated when nothing changes. Or maybe when someone hurts you, you immediately shut down or cut them off instead of communicating how you feel. When something happens once, it may just be a situation, but when you start noticing the same behavior or outcome happening over and over again, it's worth asking yourself, is there a pattern here? And this is where self-awareness requires honesty. Sometimes it's easier to focus on what everyone else is doing than it is to look at your own behavior. It's easy to say, I keep meeting the wrong people. Nobody respects me. Nothing ever works out for me. I can never reach my goals. But self-awareness asks you to look a little deeper. Is there something I'm repeatedly doing or not doing that could be contributing to this pattern? That doesn't mean you're responsible for everything that happens to you. There are things you didn't cause, things you couldn't control, things other people are responsible for. But there is power in becoming aware of the part that belongs to you. And sometimes when you look underneath a behavior, you realize that it's serving a purpose. Maybe procrastination helps you avoid the possibility of failure. Maybe people-pleasing helps you avoid disappointing someone. Maybe avoiding difficult conversations helps you avoid conflict. Maybe staying in your comfort zone helps you avoid uncertainty. The behavior may make you feel safer or more comfortable in that moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's helping you in the long run. That's why I want you to start getting curious about your patterns instead of immediately judging them. Ask yourself, what patterns keep repeating in my life? What do I usually do when I feel uncomfortable? When do I notice myself shutting down, avoiding, people-pleasing, or procrastinating, or reacting? What might this behavior be protecting me from? And one of the most important questions, is this behavior helping me become the woman I want to be? Or is it keeping me connected to an older version of myself? You may realize you've been repeating a pattern for years without ever stopping to question why. And that's okay. The purpose of self-awareness isn't to look back and shame for what you've done. It's to finally be able to recognize, this is what I tend to do. This is when I tend to do it. And now I'm beginning to understand why. That awareness matters because once you understand the patterns you've been repeating, you can begin deciding what you want to do with that awareness. Now, the fourth and final area of self-awareness is your choices. And this is where awareness turns into change. Because becoming aware of your thoughts, emotions, triggers, and patterns is powerful, but eventually you have to decide what you're going to do with what you learned about yourself. Every day you're making choices. Some are big, some are small. You choose who you spend your time with, what you tolerate, how you speak to yourself, how you respond when you're triggered, whether you set a boundary, whether you stay in your comfort zone, whether you keep a promise you made to yourself, whether you pursue an opportunity or allow fear to talk you out of it. And over time, those choices start shaping your life. Think about the woman you said you wanted to become in the identity audit from the last episode. That woman isn't created through one huge life-changing decision. She's created through small choices you make over and over again. If you want to become more confident, there will be moments when you have to choose to speak up, even though you're nervous. If you want healthier relationships, there will be moments when you have to choose a boundary, even when you're afraid someone won't like it. If you want to accomplish a goal, there will be days when you have to choose consistency and discipline, even when you don't feel motivated. If you want a different life, there will eventually be moments when you have to make choices that are different from the ones that created your current life. And this is where self-awareness becomes so important. Without awareness, you may make choices automatically. You get triggered, so you react. You feel uncomfortable, so you avoid. You feel afraid, so you don't try. You don't want to disappoint someone, so you say yes when you really want to say no. But awareness creates a pause. And inside that pause, you get to ask yourself, what do I want to choose this time? Maybe the old version of you would have stayed quiet. This time you communicate. Maybe the old version of you would have had ignored the red flag. This time you pay attention. Maybe the old version of you would have quit. This time you keep going. Maybe the old version of you would have immediately reacted out of anger. This time you take a moment and respond differently. That's how transformation happens. Not because you suddenly become perfect, but because you start catching yourself in moments where you would have normally repeated an old pattern. And you choose something different. And I want to make something clear. Choosing differently doesn't always feel comfortable. Sometimes that healthier choice will actually feel harder at first because it's unfamiliar. Setting a boundary can feel uncomfortable. Walking away can feel uncomfortable. Trying something new can feel uncomfortable. Saying no can feel uncomfortable. Choosing yourself can feel uncomfortable. But being uncomfortable doesn't always mean it's wrong. It can actually mean growth. Sometimes you're simply doing something the old version of you wasn't used to doing. So when you're faced with a decision, I want you to start asking yourself, is this choice coming from fear, habit, or the person I'm trying to be? And another question I love is, what would the woman I'm becoming choose right now? You won't always make the perfect choice. There will be moments when you fall back into your old patterns, react instead of respond, or realize afterwards that you could have handled something differently. That's the part of growth. The goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is becoming aware enough to recognize when you're getting off track and choosing differently when you can. Because remember, you can't change something you're not aware of. Self-awareness shows you the pattern. Your choice determines whether you continue repeating it. When I look back at my own transformation, I can see how all four of these areas, my thoughts, emotions and triggers, patterns and behaviors, and choices were connected. There were times when I wasn't nearly as self-aware as I am today. I didn't always stop and ask myself why certain things bother me, why I react the way I did, why I tolerate certain behaviors, or why I kept making some of the choices I was making. I was just living and reacting to whatever was happening around me. But the more inner work I started doing, the more I realized that if I wanted my life to change, I had to become willing to look at myself too. I started with my thoughts. I had struggled with confidence and not always felt like I was enough. So I started paying attention to the way I spoke to myself and challenging some of the negative thoughts I had about who I was and what I was capable of. Then I started paying attention to my emotions. Instead of only focusing on what someone else said or did, I started asking myself, why did that affect me so much? Sometimes I realized that something had touched an insecurity. Sometimes I felt unheard, disrespected, rejected, or misunderstood. And sometimes the situation was bringing up something deeper that I haven't recognized before. But one of the hardest parts of becoming more self-aware was recognizing my own patterns and behaviors. I had to admit that I had people-pleasing tendencies. I didn't always have the boundaries I needed. I cared too much about what other people thought of me. I had to look at some of my relationships and ask myself, why have I accepted certain things for as long as I did? And I had to become aware of the way I communicated. There were times where I could be more aggressive in the way I expressed myself, especially when I was emotional. Those things weren't always comfortable to admit, but I realized that I couldn't change something about myself while also refusing to acknowledge it. And once I became aware of those things, my choices started changing. I started setting stronger boundaries instead of automatically people-pleasing. I started communicating what I was feeling instead of allowing everything to build up inside of me. I learned to respond more calmly instead of immediately reacting from emotion. I became more intentional about the relationships I allowed into my life. And I started choosing to believe in myself more. And none of that happened overnight. It happened little by little. I would catch a thought. I would notice an emotion. I would recognize a pattern. And then I would have a choice. Do I respond the way I've always responded? Or do I try something different? And I didn't always get it right. Sometimes I still reacted. Sometimes I still questioned myself. Sometimes I didn't recognize what I was doing until it happened. Even recognizing it afterwards was progress. Because then I could look back and ask, what happened? What was I feeling? What did I do? And what could I do differently next time? Over time, those small moments of awareness started adding up. I became more confident in myself. I developed stronger boundaries. I learned to communicate better. I became calmer and better at expressing my emotions. I stopped feeling responsible for keeping everyone happy. I became more intentional about who I allowed into my life. And most importantly, I started trusting myself more. I'm still growing and I'm still learning things about myself today. I don't believe self-awareness is somewhere you arrive and suddenly, okay, I completely understand myself now. As you grow and enter different seasons of your life, you're going to continue discovering new things about yourself. But I can tell you this, the woman I am today didn't happen by accident. She came from becoming aware of the woman I was, being honest about what needed to change, and intentionally doing the work to become the woman I wanted to be. So if you're listening to this episode and recognizing some things about yourself that you don't necessarily like, don't run from them. Get curious about them, because seeing something about yourself that needs to change isn't a failure. It's an opportunity to grow. And that brings me to another important part of self-awareness. Taking ownership of your life. Taking ownership doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that's happened to you. There are things people may have done to you that you didn't deserve. There are circumstances you didn't choose. There are things from your past that you couldn't control. Taking ownership means recognizing that even though you can't change what happened, you get to decide what's happening next. At some point, I had to stop looking only at what other people had done, what life had handed me, or what I wish had happened differently. I had to ask myself, okay, what can I control from here? I can control my boundaries. I can control who I allow access to me. I can control how I speak to myself. I can control whether I continue repeating a pattern once I recognize it. And I can control what kind of woman I'm choosing to become. That's ownership. It's moving from why does this keep happening to me to what is within my control and what am I going to do about it. And sometimes taking ownership means admitting something you don't necessarily want to admit. Maybe you ignore the red flags. Maybe you didn't communicate what you needed. Maybe you kept saying yes when you wanted to say no. Maybe you've been waiting for motivation instead of becoming disciplined. Maybe you know what needs to change, but you've been afraid to change it. You don't have to shame yourself for any of that. But once you become aware of something, you have the responsibility to yourself to decide what you're going to do with that awareness. Because your past may explain some of your patterns, but it doesn't have to determine your future. Other people may have influenced the woman you've been. Life circumstances may have shaped parts of you, but you get a say in the woman you become next. And to me, that's one of the most empowering parts of self-awareness. You're not just learning about yourself, you're learning where your power is. So now, I don't want you to just listen to everything we talked about today. I want you to actually apply it. Grab a piece of paper and a pen or open the notes app on your phone. I want you to think about one recent situation where you had a strong reaction, felt triggered, made a choice you regret, or found yourself repeating a pattern you know you want to change. Don't choose 10 things, choose one. Maybe you got into an argument with someone. Maybe you said yes to something when you really wanted to say no. Maybe you procrastinated on something important. Maybe you ignored a red flag. Maybe you talked yourself out of an opportunity. Maybe you compared yourself to someone else and immediately started feeling bad about your own life. Let's use that situation. Divide your paper into 5 sections. What happened, my thoughts, my emotions and triggers, my patterns or behavior, and my choice. First, write down what happened. And I want you to stick to the facts. What actually happened? Not what you think the other person meant, not what you assume they were thinking, but what you actually know happened. Next, write down your thoughts. What did you immediately tell yourself about the situation? Maybe it was, they don't respect me. I'm not good enough. I'm going to fail. They're going to leave me. Everyone else is doing better than me. Whatever comes up, write it down without judging yourself. Then move to your emotions and triggers. What did you feel? Angry, embarrassed, rejected, jealous, afraid, disappointed, insecure? And then ask yourself, what exactly triggered that feeling? Was it only what happened in that moment, or did the situation touch an insecurity, fear, expectation, or something you've experienced before? Next, look at your pattern or behavior. What did you do because of what you were thinking and feeling? Did you shut down? Did you yell? Did you overthink? Did you people please? Did you avoid the conversation? Did you procrastinate? Did you immediately assume the worst? And then ask yourself, have I done this before? If the answer is yes, you may have just identified a pattern. Finally, look at your choice. Ask yourself, knowing what I know now, how could I respond differently if this happened again? Maybe you communicate instead of shutting down. Maybe you set a boundary instead of saying yes. Maybe you ask a question instead of assuming the worst. Maybe you take the opportunity even though you're afraid. Maybe you give yourself time to calm down instead of responding. Maybe you simply tell yourself, I'm not going to let this thought make my decision for me. And then I want you to answer one question at the bottom of your page. What would the woman I'm becoming choose? Really sit with that question. Because this exercise isn't about going back and beating yourself up over what you could have done differently. You didn't have the awareness then that you have right now. The purpose is to understand yourself better so that the next time you're faced with a similar situation, you have another option. Remember, catch the thought, name the emotion, recognize the pattern, choose your response. That's self-awareness in action. And I challenge you to practice this throughout your week. When something triggers you, don't immediately judge yourself or react. Pause. Ask yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? What do I normally do here? And then, what do I want to choose this time? You may not catch yourself every single time. Sometimes you'll recognize the pattern after you already reacted. That's okay. Recognizing it afterwards is still awareness. And the more you practice this, the easier it becomes to recognize yourself in the moment. Because the goal isn't perfection. The goal is to know yourself well enough that you stop living your life completely on autopilot. You become more intentional about your thoughts, your reactions, your behaviors, and ultimately your choices. And that's how self-awareness starts becoming transformation. As we close out this episode, I want you to remember that getting to know yourself is one of the most powerful things you can do for your life. The more you understand yourself, the easier it becomes to recognize what belongs in your life, what needs to change, and what you're ready to leave behind. You don't have to figure out everything out at once. Growth happens in the small moments when you decide to be honest with yourself. Give yourself grace and make choices that move you closer to the life you actually want. As you go through this week, stay curious about yourself. Give yourself permission to learn, grow, change your mind, and do things differently. The woman you're becoming isn't created overnight. She's created every time you decide that your past doesn't have to dictate your future. You can't change something you're not aware of. But once you become aware of it, you give yourself the opportunity to change it. Each episode, we will get deeper and deeper, and I will continue to give you the tools that you can put into action. In the next episode, we will go over learning to love yourself again. I'm so happy to be on this journey with you to build a legacy and live empowered. If you love this video, don't forget to like and share, comment below my choice, If you have done the exercise, if you want to share me your answers, you can comment below as well as message me. If you haven't already subscribed, hit that bell so you get aware when I post my next video. Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope this episode helped you understand yourself a little more deeply and remind you how much power you have in creating what comes next. Remember, information can inspire you, but transformation changes your legacy. This podcast is where your purpose meets power, and every story becomes your legacy. Have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.